I am as surprised to be here as I am grateful. I never thought of myself as courageous, and still don't. Ron Ridenhour was courageous. To get the story out, he had to defy the whole might and power of the United States government, including its war machine. I was then publisher of Newsday, having left the White House some 2 years earlier. Our editor, Bill McElwain, played the My Lai story big, as he should, much to the chagrin of the owner, who couldn't believe Americans were capable of such atrocities. Our readers couldn't believe it either. Some of them picketed Newsday outside my office for days, their signs accusing the paper of being anti-America, for abetting the enemy by publishing repugnant news about our troops. Some things never change. A few years after that, I gave the commencement at a nearby university, and when I'd finished the speech, a young woman who'd just been graduated came up to me and said, "Mr. Moyers, you've been in both government and journalism. That makes everything you say twice as hard to believe." She was onto something. After my government experience, it took me a while to get my footing back in journalism. I had to learn all over again that what's important for the journalist is not how close you are to power, but how close you are to reality. Over the last 40 years, I would find that reality in assignment after assignment, from covering famine in Africa and war in Central America, to inner-city families trapped in urban ghettos, and middle-class families all across the heartland struggling to survive in a period of downsizing. I also had to learn one of journalism's basic lessons. The job of trying to tell the truth about people whose job it is to hide the truth is almost as complicated and difficult as trying to hide it in the first place. We are, of course, as journalists, obliged to cover the news, but our deeper mission is to uncover the news that powerful people would prefer to keep hidden. Unless you're willing to fight and refight the same battles until you go blue in the face, drive the people you work with nuts, going over every last detail to make certain you've got it right, and then take all the slings and arrows directed at you by the powers that be, corporate and political and sometimes journalistic, there's no use even trying. You have to love it, and I do. I.F. Stone once said, after years of catching the government's lies and contradictions, "I have so much fun I ought to be arrested." Journalism 101. So it wasn't courage I counted on. It was exhilaration and good luck. When the road forked, I somehow stumbled into the right path, thanks to mentors like Eric Severide, Fred Friendly, Walter Cronkite, and scores of producers, researchers, and editors who lifted me to see further than one can see unless one is standing on the shoulders of others. The quintessential lesson of my life came from another Texan named John Henry Falk. John Henry Falk was a graduate, as am I, of the University of Texas. He served in the Merchant Marines, the American Red Cross, and the U.S. Army during World War II, and came home to become a celebrated raconteur and national popular radio host whose career was shattered when right-wingers, inspired by Joseph McCarthy, smeared him as a communist. He lost his sponsors and was fired. But he fought back with a lawsuit that lasted 5 years and cost him every penny he owned. Financial help from Edward R. Murrah and a few others helped him to hang on. In the end, John Henry Falk won, and his courage helped to end the Hollywood era of blacklisting. You should read his book, Fear on Trial, and see the movie starring George C. Scott. John Henry's courage was contagious. Before his death, I produced a documentary about him, and during our interview, he told me the story of how he and his friend Boots Cooper were playing in the chicken house there in Central Texas when they were about 12 years old. they spied a chicken snake in the top tier of the nest, so close it looked like a boa constrictor. As John Henry told it, all our frontier courage drained out of our heels. Actually, it trickled down our overall legs. And Boots and I made a new door through the hen house. His mama came out to see what all the fuss was about, and she said to Boots and John Henry, "Don't you know chicken snakes are harmless? They can't hurt you." Rubbing his forehead and his behind at the same time, Boots said, "Yes, Mrs. Falk, I know, but they can scare you so bad, you'll hurt yourself." John Henry Falk never forgot that lesson. I'm always ashamed when I do. Temptation is the original sin of journalism, and we're always finding fig leaves to cover it. Economics, ideology, all for authority, secrecy, the claims of empire. In the build-up to the invasion of Iraq, we were reminded of what the late great reporter A.J. Liebling meant when he said, "The press is the weak slat under the bed of democracy." The slat broke after the invasion, and some strange bedfellows fell to the floor. Establishment journalists, neocon polemicists, beltway pundits, right-wing warmongers flying the flag of the balanced and fair brigade, administration flacks whose classified ideas were only manufactured lies, all romping on the same mattress in the foreplay to disaster. 5 years, thousands of casualties, and hundreds of billion dollars later, most of the media co-conspirators caught in flagrante delicto are still prominent, still celebrated, and still holding forth with no more contrition than a weathercaster who made a wrong prediction as to the next day's temperature. The biblical injunction, go and sin no more, is the one we most frequently forget in the press. Collectively, we don't seem to learn that all it takes to transform an ordinary politician and braying asses into modern incarnations of Zeus and the Oracle of Delphi is an oath on the Bible, a flag in the lapel, and the invocation of national security. There are, fortunately, always exceptions to whatever our latest dismal collective performance yields. America produces some world-class journalism, including coverage of the Iraq War by men and women as brave as Ernie Pyle and braver than I. But I still wish we had some kind of professional Hippocratic oath of our own that might stir us in the night when we stray from our mission. And yes, I believe journalism has a mission. Walter Lippmann was prescient on this long before most of you were born. Lippmann, who became the ultimate Washington insider, someone to whom I regularly leaked, acknowledged that while the press may be a weak reed to lean on, it is the indispensable support for freedom. In an exact sense, he wrote, "The present crisis of Western democracy is a crisis of journalism. Everywhere, men and women are conscious that somehow they must deal with questions more intricate than any that church or school had prepared them to understand. Increasingly, they know that they cannot understand them if the facts are not quickly and steadily available. All the sharpest critics of democracy have alleged is true. If there is no steady supply of trustworthy and relevant news, incompetence and aimlessness, corruption and disloyalty, panic and ultimate disaster must come to any people denied an assured access to the facts." So it is that for all the blunders for which we are culpable, for all the disillusionment that has set in among journalists with every fresh report of job cuts and disappearing news space, of barons and buccaneers turning the press into a karaoke of power, for all the desecration visited on broadcast journalism by the corporate networks, for all the nonsense to which so many aspiring young journalists are consigned, and for all the fears about the eroding of the quality of the craft, I still answer emphatically when young people ask me, should I go into journalism today? Sometimes it is difficult to urge them on, especially when serious questions are being asked about how loyal our society is to the reality as well as the idea of an independent and free press. But I almost always answer them, yes, if you have a fire in your belly, you can still make a difference. I remind them of the times that investigative reporting has played such a crucial role. I remind them how news bureaus abroad are a form of national security that can tell us what our government wants. I remind them how, as America grows more diverse, it's essential to have reporters, editors, producers, and writers who reflect these new rising voices and concerns. And I remind them that facts can still drive the argument and tug us in the direction of greater equality and a more democratic society. Journalism still matters. But I also tell them there is something more important than journalism, and that's the truth. They aren't necessarily one and the same, because the truth is often obscured in the news. In his new novel, The Appeal, John Grisham tells us more about corporate, political, and legal jihads than most newspapers or network news ever will. More about Wall Street shenanigans than all the cable business channels combined. More about the Manchurian candidates than you will ever hear on the Sunday morning talk shows. For that matter, you'll learn more about who wins and who loses in the real business of politics, which is governance, from the public interest truth-tellers of Washington than you will from an established press tethered to official sources. The Government Accountability Project, POGO, the Sunlight Foundation, Citizens Against Government Waste, the Center for Responsible Politics, the National Security Archive, CRUVS, the Center for Public Integrity, whistleblowers of all sorts who never went to journalism school, never flashed a press pass, and never attended a gridiron dinner. Ron Ridenhour was not a journalist when he came upon the truth of My Lai. He was in the Army. He later became a journalist, a pioneering investigative reporter, and this is the irony, who had trouble making a living in a calling where truth-telling can be a liability to the bottom line. Matthew Diaz, James Spurlock, truth-tellers without a license, reminding us that the most important credential of all is a conscience that cannot be purchased and cannot be silenced. So I tell inquisitive and aspiring young people, journalism still makes a difference, but the truth matters more. And if you can't get to the truth through journalism, there are other ways to go. So to the Nation Institute and the Fertel Foundation, to the Ridenhour judges, and to all of you, thank you again for this moment, and above all, for the courage of your own convictions. Thank you.